Hello everyone. In this video I will be recapping the first part of Season 1 of the show Rome, faithfully showing Caesar's rise to fame and his becoming of one of the most powerful men in history. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. During the siege of Alesia in 52 BC, Centurion Lucius Vorenus of the 13th Legion commands his men as Gallic warriors fall on his line. In contrast to the Gauls' chaotic charge, the Roman files fight with machine-like precision, until one legionary, Titus Pullo, breaks ranks and charges into the crowd of Gauls. Vorenus angrily orders him back into formation, but Pullo, perhaps intoxicated, strikes his commanding officer, an offense punishable by death in the Roman army. Pullo is dragged back into the lines by the other legionaries. Later, the assembled soldiers watch as Pullo is flogged and condemned to death. Though his back is torn to bits, Pullo remains full of bravado as he is untied and led away to his holding cell. The day after the siege, Vercingetorix, chieftain of the Arverni tribe and king of all the Gauls, is brought before Julius Caesar and made to surrender. In front of Caesar, he is stripped naked and then forced to kiss a legionary eagle. When he submits and kisses the eagle, Vorenus pulls out his sword and begins to chant, "Caesar! Caesar!" The 8 years of the Gallic Wars are over. In Rome, Caesar's niece, Adia of the Julii has bought a magnificent horse, intending to give it as a gift to Caesar. The horse is delivered to her house by Timon, a Jewish horse trader living in Rome. Adia is seen having sex with Timon and it is implied that they have a consensual sexual relationship based on Timon's completion of certain tasks that Adia commands. Following her encounter with Timon, Adia takes a bath and begins a conversation with her teenage son Octavian. She orders Octavian to deliver the horse she has purchased straight to Caesar in Gaul to ensure that he remembers them above all other well-wishers. In the Roman Senate, Cato the Younger moves that Caesar be stripped of his command and recalled to Rome to answer charges of misusing his office and illegal warmongering. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, as sole consul in Rome, vetoes the motion, insisting that Caesar is his friend. Many Roman senators begin to scream in disgust at Pompey's veto when the veteran senator and constant moderate Cicero demands the floor. Cicero asks for moderation in the matter, claiming that it is unwise to provoke Caesar in the manner that Cato suggests, but that it is equally unwise to offer Caesar a hand as Pompeius. Pompey, unswayed by the protestations of his fellow senators, maintains his veto on Cato's motion and leaves the Senate floor, effectively ending that session. At the theater that night, Scipio introduces his daughter Cornelia Metella to Pompey as a prospective wife. Scipio states that her husband had been killed at the Battle of Carrhae. The meeting between Pompey and Cornelia does not last long as Cornelia states that her presence at such a lewd theater show is inappropriate. While Cato warns him that he must ally against Caesar before it is too late, Pompey publicly asserts again he believes that Caesar means no harm, although privately, Pompey is troubled by Caesar's rising prestige and power. He tells one of his slaves to kill 2 birds with 1 stone during a planned trip to Gaul. At night in the encampment of the 13th Legion, the Aquila, Eagle Standard, is stolen by brigands. To avoid a potentially disastrous drop in morale, Mark Antony orders Vorenus to retrieve it. Vorenus discovers that the thieves were blue Spaniards headed to a distant corner of Gaul. Feeling his mission to track them down is doomed to failure, Vorenus has the condemned Pullo released from the stockade to assist him. In camp, Caesar welcomes Marcus Junius Brutus, his unofficial stepson whose mother is Caesar's lover, Servilia of the Junii. Later, at a party hosted by Servilia, Brutus confides to Pompey that the loss of the eagle has made Caesar unusually vulnerable. To hear Brutus tell it, his men are on the brink of mutiny and Caesar is demoralized. On the road to Caesar's camp in Gaul, Octavian is taken captive. At Caesar's request, Adia searches for a suitable wife for the recently widowed Pompey. She instructs her daughter Octavia to divorce her husband Glabius, despite her protests that they are deeply in love. Adia then presents Octavia to Pompey at a party and offers her for premarital relations, which Pompey takes advantage of. Meanwhile, Vorenus and Pullo set off in search of the eagle and encounter and rescue Octavian from his captors. When Vorenus explains who they are, Octavian shows himself to be more shrewd and devious than either he or Pullo. He explains that their mission is only a gesture, since the theft of the eagle is actually a blessing in disguise to Caesar. Civil war between Caesar and Pompey is inevitable, but Caesar needs Pompey to make the first move so as not to appear the aggressor. Pompey is likely to do just that if he believes that Caesar's soldiers are on the verge of deserting him. As Octavian says that Caesar would prefer the eagle to remain lost, Vorenus and Pullo discover evidence that Pompey ordered its capture. The trio returns in triumph to camp, where a surprised yet grateful Caesar takes stock. He has the eagle back, and more than adequate proof of Pompey's hostility. He informs Pompey of his next move, to winter the 13th Legion at Ravenna, on the border with Italy, in preparation for pressing his rights to the consulship. Pompey breaks his ties with Caesar and takes Cornelia as his wife. Octavia, humiliated at being used by Pompey and heartbroken over her now pointless divorce, says she wants him dead. This second episode is based on events that took place in 50 BC and 49 BC. Caesar's proconsulship in Gaul is about to expire, which would mean a loss of the office's immunity against prosecution by his political enemies. He had faced the same situation 5 years prior, but at that time his command had been extended with the help of his allies Pompey and Marcus Crassus. This time Caesar cannot count on his former allies, as Pompey has openly turned against him, and Crassus was killed in 53 BC. Caesar instead has to rely on Mark Antony for his political maneuvering. Newly elected to the office of Tribune of the People, Tribunus Plebis, Mark Antony has veto power in the Roman Senate. Meanwhile, Lucius Vorenus, now a first-file centurion, Centurio Primi Pili, and Titus Pullo return to Rome. After dropping off Octavian, Vorenus returns to his wife, whom he hasn't seen in 8 years since he left for Gaul, only to find her holding a fairly new baby in her arms. When Vorenus asks her whose child it is, she tells him it is his grandson by his eldest daughter who has just newly turned 14. Meanwhile, Pullo returns to soliciting prostitutes and gambling. He's already lost most of his money in a gambling den full of Pompey's supporters when he discovers that he is being cheated by one of his opponents. He stabs the man through the throat, but is injured in the fight that breaks out. Pullo manages to drag himself to Vorenus's home, where he receives trepanation, courtesy of Vorenus, from a Greek doctor. Caesar's political enemies, led by Pompey, plan to pass a motion in the Senate that would set an ultimatum for Caesar to surrender his command, or be declared a public enemy. Pompey enlists the help of Cato, Scipio, Pompey's new father-in-law, and of the reluctant Cicero. Pompey wants the motion to pass by a large majority, so that Caesar will see that he is isolated and has no political supporters. However, Pompey also wants the motion to be immediately vetoed by Caesar's ally Mark Antony so that the blame for any subsequent escalation would rest with Caesar. The motion is passed, but a brawl erupts on the Senate floor and Mark Antony's veto is not recorded, nor is the session formally adjourned. Pompey is taken by surprise, and arranges for the Senate session to be continued the next day so that the tribune's veto can be recorded. He also gives orders to his minions that Mark Antony must not be harmed in any way. Not knowing of Pompey's orders and feeling threatened because of his association with Caesar, Mark Antony calls on the soldiers from Caesar's 13th Legion, Legio 13, including Vorenus and Pullo, for protection. With Vorenus and Pullo walking beside him, Mark Antony makes his way to the Forum in order to properly record his veto in the Senate. Just as they are marching through a throng of Pompey's supporters, a friend of the man Pullo killed in the gambling den fight lunges from the crowd with a knife and attacks Pullo. Though the assailant is cut down swiftly, both sides believe that Mark Antony was the intended victim and a bloody fight erupts between the two mobs, just as Pompey emerges from the Senate house. Vorenus and Pullo escape with Antony, though the former is wounded and barely survives the return to Caesar's 13th Legion in Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy. Having been declared an enemy of Rome by the Senate, Caesar marches his army south toward Rome, marking the beginning of the civil war. Caesar crosses the Rubicon River with the remainder of his army in January, 49 BC. As the news is cried throughout the city, Niobe suckles the baby, indicating that it is really hers. At the opening, Caesar, at the head of his still advancing army, is sending Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo, along with the Euboean cavalry for reinforcement, ahead to Rome on a scouting mission for Pompey's defenses with the strict mandate to advance only until resistance is met and, if civilians are met along the way, they are to give Caesar's proclamation to them and to instruct them to return to Rome and have it read in the Forum. Mark Antony tells Vorenus that if no resistance is met and they encounter no civilians, he is to take the proclamation and nail it to the door of the Senate house. Caesar is curious as to why Vorenus is so morose and asks Antony. Antony reveals that Vorenus is a strict Catonian and believes what Caesar is doing is a terrible sacrilege, to which Caesar responds that he is only seeking his legitimate right. Meanwhile in Rome, a man enters Vorenus' home as Niobe is preparing food and walks straight to the baby's crib, telling Niobe that he just wants to see his son. Niobe tells him to leave, but as he makes to do so, he turns back to face Niobe to try to persuade her to love him again. She resists for a moment but slowly starts to give in, but just as the two are about to exchange a kiss, Vorenus the elder enters the door and interrupts them. Niobe quickly makes the man leave. Vorenus believes that if Niobe were to tell Vorenus the truth about the baby and that she thought he was dead, Vorenus would forgive her and everything would be fine, but Niobe knows full well better. She knows that if Vorenus were to learn the truth, He would then have the legal and moral right and obligation to kill her and all his children. As the scouting mission camps for the night, Vorenus asks Pullo for advice on how to get Niobe to love him again since he's been away at war in Gaul for 8 years and knows virtually nothing about women. Pullo, being the self-declared consummate authority on women, jumps at the chance to tell Vorenus everything he knows. Back in Rome, Pompey, Cicero, Cato and Scipio all discuss options as they receive word of Caesar's advancement only being 30 miles from the city. Though they have 4 legions in Rome, they are either untrained conscripts, a unit of which is wiped out by Vorenus's scouts, or are veterans of the Gallic Wars whose loyalty can't be counted upon. They decide a tactical retreat to Corfinium is the best plan of action so that they can rally their legions and retake the city when all is ready. As Attia is holding a dinner with Servilia and Brutus in a show of unity, Pompeian supporters outside the house begin to cause a small riot and beat on the doors with a small battering ram while shouting insults through the open atrium ceiling. Meanwhile, Pompey and his family are making final preparations for their retreat from the city, during which Cornelia reminds Pompey of the treasury gold, who in turn tells his man Durio that he and a small detachment of men must go to the Capitoline vaults, which are only to be touched in cases of extreme peril, and get as much of the gold as they can. The task complete, the detachment begins to make their way from the city, but when Durio tells the driver that he's going the wrong way from the Appian Gate, the man tells him they're not going to the Appian Gate and proceeds to stab Durio and throw him from the ox cart. Later, as the soldiers with the stolen gold are making their way from the city, we are introduced to Irene. She is walking down the road as the soldiers are passing and before she knows it, she's whisked up onto the back of a horse by a legionary, very unceremoniously, and inevitably becomes a slave. Brutus and Servilia discuss their predicament. Brutus knows that if he stays in the city because of his friendship with Caesar, he effectively declares for Caesar and rebellion. If he leaves with the Senate, he declares for them and the preservation of the Republic. Ultimately, he decides to go with Pompey and the Senate because of his family's history with the politics of Rome. His ancestor founded the Republic and became its first consul after driving out the last king of Rome. Servilia, on the other hand, is of a different mind. She wants to stay in Rome to be there when Caesar returns in order to rekindle their romance. Back on the road to Rome, Vorenus and Pullo, still unable to figure out why they're meeting no resistance, cross paths with the soldiers and the stolen treasury gold, along with Irene being led along tied to the wagon by her bound wrists. The soldiers explain that the lack of resistance is because Pompey and the Senate have left the city, thereby permitting Vorenus and the scouting party to proceed without caution. When Vorenus questions the lead man about the cart, he's told that it's just a grain wagon. But when Vorenus points out that they're all wearing soldiers' sandals and that soldiers would have no business guarding a grain wagon, a fight ensues and all the men but the driver, who has taken refuge in the woods, are driven off and killed while Irene remains tied to the wagon. While Attia holds court for plebeians seeking the support of the Julii, Vorenus, Pullo and the scouting party finally enter Rome and make their way to the Forum, where Vorenus nails Caesar's proclamation to the Senate door. He then heads to his home telling Pullo that he's done what was asked of him and he will sin no more. Pullo, on the other hand, still intrigued with Irene, goes back to find the wagon. When he locates it, he finds Irene lying on the ground with her wrists still bound to the wagon. Upon discovering she is still alive, he unties her and sets her up in the wagon before he checks to see what exactly is in it. He opens one box, takes one look and shuts it quickly, breathing heavily. He looks in the next box with the same reaction. Then he pulls back the covering to see exactly how many boxes are in the wagon and gasps at what he thinks is his newfound wealth. As he's surmising the situation, he hears the trumpets of Caesar's army approaching and quickly makes a getaway before they arrive. In their camp in southern Italia, Pompey and the Senate's generals Marcus Junius Brutus, Marcus Tullius Cicero, Cato the Younger and Quintus Cecilius Metellus Pius Scipio Nasica, are discussing the current situation. Caesar has marched on Rome and taken control of the city without meeting any form of resistance. Pompey has withdrawn to the south to muster his veterans, while expecting Caesar's force to desert him once the treasury is found empty and Caesar is left without money to pay his soldiers. But to their confusion, the team they dispatched to retrieve the treasury gold has not returned. Pompey's malevolent son, Quintus, enters after torturing a prisoner, the only survivor of the group sent to recover the gold, and delivers grim news to his father. The team turned on their leader, Pompey's man Durio, and attempted to take the gold for themselves, but were intercepted by Caesar's scouts, led by Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo, on their way out of the city. Quintus is convinced Caesar's men have kept the gold for themselves and Pompey sends him to Rome to find out for sure. In Rome, Attia has already been receiving petitioners eager to court Caesar's favor. but is worried about Servilia's influence with Caesar. Attia plans a lavish dinner party with Caesar as the guest of honor. Caesar petitions the priests of Jupiter for a formal blessing on his endeavors to legitimize his seizure of the city. Antony offers Vorenus a post as a prefect on his staff, with a substantial signing bonus. Vorenus, believing that Caesar's actions are illegal, rejects the offer. He plans to start a business trading slaves and other imports from Gaul. He and Niobe host the traditional feast as a tribute to Janus, and their guests include local Aventine businessman Erastes Fulman, Niobe's sister, Lyd, and her brother-in-law, Evander Pulchio. But things do not go well. Lyd, getting drunk, begins loudly berating her husband, knowing too well that Evander and Niobe had an affair while Vorenus was gone. In Niobe's rush to silence her before she lets something slip to Vorenus, the bust of Janus is overturned, an ill omen. While cleaning up the remains of the party, Vorenus and Niobe are accosted by Quintus Pompey and a band of mercenaries, who demand to know where the gold is. Vorenus says he knows nothing of any gold, and Quintus's men are about to kill Niobe, when Pullo arrives with Irene, both of them dressed like royalty and scattering coins to a crowd of worshippers. Pullo has come to call on his old commander, but, seeing the thugs, attacks them and he and Vorenus manage to overpower them and tie up the younger Pompey. Pullo proposes that they flee the country together with the gold, but Vorenus orders him to return it to Caesar. If he does so, and takes along the captured Pompey, Caesar might show mercy. Pullo is aghast at the idea of giving up his new wealth, but Vorenus reminds him that he has already broadcast his theft across the whole city. Pullo reluctantly obeys. At the dinner party, Caesar is called outside to meet Pullo. He decides to show mercy to Pullo, and then surprises Antony by ordering Quintus released and sent back to Pompey's camp, bearing Caesar's terms of truce. Antony obeys, then leads Pullo and a party to retrieve the gold. Noticing Octavian watching, Caesar shares some confidences with his grandnephew. Like Antony, Octavian is initially confused by Caesar's release of Quintus, but unlike Antony, he quickly works out the real reason. Caesar's terms of surrender will be too humiliating for Pompey to accept, but his show of clemency will encourage the rest of the senators to abandon Pompey and seek Caesar's mercy. Chuckling, Caesar begins to congratulate Octavian on his acumen, then is struck down by an attack of epilepsy. Posca quickly hustles his master into an empty closet to wait out the fit, while rejecting Octavian's offer to call for a doctor. At all costs, Caesar must keep his affliction secret. Once he has recovered, Caesar makes Octavian vow never to speak of his condition. However, one of Attia's servants hears the yelling and groaning from the cupboard and, on seeing Octavian and Caesar emerge, leaves to inform Attia. Returning to the party, Caesar orders Calpurnia escorted home, then goes alone to spend the night with Servilia. Servilia, who had been worried by his reserved attitude towards her at the party, is delighted. With money to pay his soldiers, and distribute enormous bribes among the city officials, Caesar receives the formal blessing of the priesthood in the Temple of Jupiter. Pompey receives Julius Caesar's offer of a truce. To general surprise, he accepts. This presents Caesar with a dilemma, since he confidently expected Pompey to refuse, but now needs a suitable pretext to reject a truce. Caesar uses Pompey's refusal to meet with him face to face, calling it a mortal insult. Attia announces that she has retained Titus Pullo to tutor her son Octavian in the masculine arts, how to fight, copulate, skin animals and so forth. Octavian proves to be an indifferent swordsman, but takes a liking to Pullo, and the soldier takes the boy into his confidence, confessing that he has suspicions about Niobe and her brother-in-law, Evander. The two make a pact to find out the truth, without telling Lucius Vorenus. Meanwhile, Vorenus's financial difficulties are mounting. He inspects his share of the slaves taken in Gaul, and finds that nearly all of them have died of disease, on top of which he still has to pay the bill for their transport and feeding. He asks Erastes Fulman for a loan, but the crafty gangster demurs, and instead maneuvers Lucius into accepting a lucrative position as his enforcer. Having captured the city, Caesar seems to be in no hurry to pursue Pompey to the coast, instead spending his evenings dallying with Servilia. Jealous of her influence over Caesar, Attia hires Timon to paint rude graffiti depicting Caesar and Servilia's relationship all over the city. Mortified, Caesar's wife Calpurnia threatens to divorce him unless he breaks off relations with Servilia. Since he still needs her family's political and financial support, Caesar does so, and Servilia is livid. Caesar prepares to march on Pompey without further ado, and appoints Mark Antony prefect of the city in his absence, despite the latter's protests. "I'm a soldier, not a peacekeeper." Late at night, Pullo kidnaps Evander, with Octavian tagging along, and they interrogate him in an underground walkway beside one of the sewers. Octavian, to Pullo's surprise, directs Pullo to torture Evander when he refuses to talk with surprising bloodlust and cruelty. After losing both thumbs and being beaten severely, Evander admits that he and Niobe had become lovers after Vorenus was mistakenly pronounced dead in Gaul, and that Niobe's grandson is in fact her son by him. Outraged, Pullo kills Evander and dumps his body into the sewer. Octavian warns him that Vorenus can never learn what has happened. Vorenus reports for duty as Orestes' bodyguard, but quits as soon as he sees what is expected of him, torturing, and then killing, a business client of Fulman's who considered himself cheated in a recent deal. Despite his political opposition to Caesar, Vorenus has no choice but to approach Antony, pleading for a renewal of Antony's prior offer. Antony does not usually believe in second chances, but he needs good men around him in his new, unfamiliar role as city protector. Vorenus is reinstated into the army as Avocati prefect, with a cut in his promised signing bonus. In the most solemn terms, Servilia inscribes cursed tablets against both Caesar and Attia, and a slave deposits them in their respective houses. She is now committed to destroying both of them. Caesar and his army reach the coast to find that they are too late. Pompey has escaped to Greece, no doubt to raise a new army against Caesar. While Caesar is engaging Pompey's forces in Greece, Antony is administering Rome and pushing through laws on his behalf. Among his demands are that the consul-elect for the coming year nominate Caesar as his consular colleague, and then endorse a law that, henceforth, at least a third of Rome's agricultural workforce shall be freeborn, and not slaves. The consul-elect protests at the expense of such a law. Only to those few rich men that own all the land, Antony replies breezily, and they will have the consolation of doing something eminently patriotic. In the home of Lucius Vorenus, all is not well. His wife, Niobe, has taken in her sister, Lyd, since the disappearance of her husband, Evander, and her constant presence grates on Vorenus's nerves. Pullo, who secretly tortured and killed Evander, tells Lyd that he's heard rumors that Evander was killed over gambling debts by some Greek men, and will definitely not be coming back. Pullo urges Lyd to forget the past and get on with her life, looking instead to the people that love her, adding a stern "isn't that right?" in Niobe's direction. After Pullo leaves, Niobe tries to comfort Lyd, but Lyd will have none of it, calling her sister a thief and a whore. Niobe protests that Evander came to her, and wouldn't have if Lyd has been a better wife. Which Lyd takes to mean, if she'd given him a child. Lyd hisses, "By grace of the Furies, I curse you." She promises to keep the secret for the sake of the child, but insists that Niobe never speak to her again. Attia, still preoccupied with making a man of her son, suggests that he join Caesar's army to get some real Pompeian blood on your sword. She also insists that Pullo help him to lose his virginity. Pullo takes him to one of the higher-end brothels in town, where Octavian is presented with an assortment of attractive women and teenage boys. He chooses an adequate young woman, and after hearing the sad tale of her murdered family, instructs her to get on her hands and knees, implying indifference to her fate. When Octavian emerges from the chamber, Pullo asks how it went, but the response is one of awkward indifference. That evening, Vorenus returns home, to see that Lyd is gone, and Niobe has dutifully prepared a meal for him. He invites her to sit with him, and they share a rare moment of contentment, before she invites him to couple with her, since the calendar is correct. Caesar sends an urgent dispatch to Rome, informing Antony that, after Caesar arrived in Greece, Pompey consistently refused battle, evading Caesar's army and gathering the East's legions together. Now, his army outnumbers Caesar's 10-1, and Caesar is retreating. He orders Antony to set sail for Greece with the 13th Legion as quickly as possible. Soon after hearing this news, Antony receives a visit from one of Pompey's emissaries, who encourages him to betray Caesar and remain in Rome. He reasons that if Antony goes, he will be doomed anyway, but if he stays, Pompey will give him a province to govern and money enough to preserve your dignity. Caught, Antony says he needs a day to think on it. At home, Vorenus is troubled by Antony's consideration of such a dishonorable course. Laughing softly, Niobe chides him for his rigid moralizing, and reminds him that she'd much rather he stay in Rome with her. Attia also makes a plea for Antony to reconsider his allegiances, and after a night of passion she suggests the two of them get married. If Caesar is defeated, she will need Antony's protection, and he will need coin and nobility enough to make himself a king and her a queen. "If I were to desert a friend, a man of your own blood?" he says, suddenly bristling. Seeing his own shamelessness reflected in hers, he turns on her. "I did not realize until now what a wicked old harpy you are." With this Attia slaps him, and he slaps back, and she screams at him to get out. After collapsing into a fit of sobs, Attia shifts her focus towards making amends with Servilia, who she will need when Caesar is defeated. She buys Servilia a set of lavish gifts, including a well-endowed male slave, and a gold tortoise. She enlists her daughter Octavia to convey the gifts to Servilia, who greets the gifts coldly, but assures Octavia that despite what others might do, she knows that the girl has a good soul, and encourages her to visit again. As for Octavian, now that he is a man, Attia has decided to send him to an academy in Mediolanum, outside of Rome, as the city is not safe for men of the Julii. Antony prepares to depart for Greece without further delay. Vorenus and Niobe's brief spell of married contentment is halted when the 13th legion is mobilized. As he is leaving, Pompey's envoy demands his answer, and Antony gives it with a solid punch to the jaw. The 13th sails for Greece during heavy rains and stormy seas. Pullo complains about being wet, and Vorenus reminds him that a favorable offering was made to Triton before they sailed, and so they should be perfectly safe. Pullo responds with a blasphemous comment, and, as if in retaliation, the storm intensifies and the ships go down at sea.